I remember the exact moment I stopped trusting my own memory. It was a Tuesday, sometime past midnight, and I was lying on my side of the bed, the left side, the side I'd slept on for over a decade, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a man who knows something is wrong but cannot name it yet. Emma was asleep beside me, or appeared to be. Her breathing was slow and even. Her face was turned slightly away. On the nightstand between us, her phone was face down, but the edge of the screen caught the ambient glow from the streetlight outside and pulsed once, very faintly, like something alive. I didn't reach for it. I told myself it was nothing, a calendar notification, a promotional email, one of those meaningless midnight pings that modern life generates constantly. I closed my eyes. I opened them again. I lay there for another 40 minutes before I finally fell asleep, and when I woke in the morning, Emma was already in the shower, and the phone was gone from the nightstand entirely. That was 3 weeks before everything came apart. My name is Ryan. At the time all of this happened, I was a project manager at a mid-sized logistics firm, not the kind of job that makes strangers' eyes light up at dinner parties, but solid work, the kind that paid the mortgage on our house in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of the city. We bought it 6 years into the marriage, the two of us walking through empty rooms with a real estate agent who kept calling us, "You two," as if we were a single entity, which, at the time, felt true enough. Emma had picked the kitchen tiles. I'd repainted the garage. We'd built something together, incrementally, over more than a decade, the way people do when they believe they're going to grow old in the same direction. Emma worked in marketing at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. She was good at her job, persuasive, detail-oriented, genuinely passionate about the industry in a way that had always impressed me. In the early years of our marriage, she used to come home and describe her day with the energy of someone narrating a thriller, eyes animated, hands moving. Somewhere along the way that energy had quieted. I noticed, but I told myself it was simply the natural settling of a long marriage, the way conversation eventually becomes comfortable rather than electric. I told myself that was fine. That was what maturity looked like. I had been telling myself a lot of things. The first time Emma mentioned Adam's name, I was washing dishes and half listening to her recount a team meeting she'd attended that afternoon. She described him as the new regional sales consultant, recently transferred from the company's Chicago office, extremely organized, good with data. She said he had a way of cutting through unnecessary meetings that everyone on the team seemed to appreciate. The way she said his name, with that very small, barely perceptible uptick of warmth, didn't register consciously. Not that night. But something registered. Some low, wordless frequency that I filed away without knowing I was filing it. That night, after she fell asleep, I went to the kitchen and stood at the counter in the dark for a long time, drinking a glass of water I didn't need, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and trying to identify exactly what it was I was feeling. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't suspicion. It was something smaller and stranger, a faint, unlocatable wrongness, like a room where all the furniture has been shifted exactly 2 centimeters to the left. Everything looks correct at first glance. But your body knows. Life, to its credit, is very good at looking normal even when it isn't. The weeks that followed were full of the ordinary texture of our shared existence: grocery runs, Sunday dinners, the sounds of separate screens in adjacent rooms in the evening. Emma and I had a routine that had evolved over years into something close to choreography. She made coffee in the mornings, I took out the recycling on Thursdays, we watched a streaming series together on Friday nights with the kind of half-attentiveness that long-married couples develop, conversation drifting in and out of the plot. It was not an unhappy life. That is what made everything so difficult to see. The changes came in small increments, the way temperature drops in autumn, gradual enough that you keep convincing yourself it's still warm enough not to need a coat. Emma started working late. Not dramatically late, never past 9, but consistently later than she had in previous years. She'd text me around 6 to say she was finishing something up, would be home by 8:30. I believed her. I heated up dinner and ate alone and left a plate covered in foil on the counter, which is what I'd done on the occasional late nights before, which is exactly why it didn't feel alarming. Context is the most effective camouflage there is. Then came the clothes. Emma had always dressed professionally. She worked in pharma marketing, image mattered, but I began to notice a subtle shift in what she chose to wear to the office. A new blouse appeared, a deep teal color that I'd never seen before. Then a pair of earrings I didn't recognize, small gold ones that caught light in a way that seemed designed to be caught. She wore perfume differently, too, not a new scent, but more of it, applied with more care, in the mornings before work when previously perfume had been a weekend thing. I noticed without remarking on it, the way you notice a painting has been rehung but don't want to seem like the kind of person who tracks such things. I mentioned the teal blouse once, casually, telling her it looked nice. She smiled and said she'd found it on sale. End of conversation. Perfectly ordinary. And yet I found myself cataloging the moment anyway, storing it alongside the midnight phone pulse, and the slight warmth in her voice when she said Adam's name. Adam's name was coming up more frequently now. Not obsessively, nothing that obvious. But consistently. He was mentioned in the context of a successful campaign pitch he'd helped structure, then in the context of a happy hour the team had attended that Emma had, she said, only stayed at briefly. He appeared in an anecdote about a difficult client that Adam had apparently handled with remarkable composure. He was assembled, piece by piece, in my mind as a figure I'd never met but was somehow growing to know, confident, charming, at ease in rooms. Emma described him with a specific kind of admiration, the kind that goes slightly past professional respect and starts to carry a different weight. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had a conversation with myself that I am, in retrospect, ashamed of, the one where I enumerated all the reasons my suspicion was irrational, all the evidence that Emma was simply enthusiastic about a talented new colleague, all the ways in which 10 years of stable marriage ought to function as proof against betrayal. I was very persuasive. I almost believed myself completely. Then one Thursday evening I came home from work early, a meeting had been cancelled, and found Emma in the living room, phone to her ear, laughing. The laugh was the problem. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it was the particular laugh she used to direct at me in the early years of our relationship, unguarded, genuine, slightly breathless. She saw me come in and her expression shifted. Not dramatically. There was no guilt flash, no dropped call. She just pivoted naturally, said, "My husband just got home," into the phone, and wrapped up the conversation in a way that was smooth enough to be rehearsed. "Who was that?" I asked. "Lily," she said. "She's having a rough time with Marcus again." Lily was Emma's closest friend, and Marcus was Lily's on-again off-again boyfriend, and their relationship was turbulent enough that Lily calling in distress was entirely plausible. I nodded. I went to the kitchen. I stood at the counter with the same glass of water I always didn't need and tried to remember the last time Emma had laughed like that on the phone with Lily. I couldn't. The first concrete anomaly appeared on a Saturday. Emma told me she was spending the afternoon with Lily, a shopping trip to the west side, maybe a late lunch. She'd mentioned Lily's ongoing Marcus's situation twice that week, so it made sense as a reason to get together. She left around noon in the teal blouse and the gold earrings, and I spent the afternoon doing yard work and not thinking about it, or trying not to. At 3 in the afternoon, I sent her a text asking if she wanted me to start dinner. The reply came 40 minutes later, "Yes please, don't make anything heavy, probably grabbing something with Lily." Not unusual. I made pasta. I set the table for 2. That evening, after Emma was home and we were clearing the plates, I mentioned I'd been meaning to text Lily myself. We had a standing joke between the 3 of us about a television show, and I'd seen something online I wanted to share. Emma's hand paused on the edge of her plate for just a fraction of a second. "She's been really off her phone today," Emma said, trying to clear her head a bit. I didn't text Lily. But the pause lived in me. A week later, on the drive to a dinner with Emma's work colleagues, an annual thing, a restaurant booking, 2 hours of professional small talk over shared plates, I paid close attention to how she behaved. I watched her from across the table for most of the evening, observed her in the social context of her professional world. She was warm, engaged, relaxed in the way that people who are comfortable in a space tend to be. Adam, I noted, was not present. When I asked later, she said he'd sent his apologies, prior engagement. She said it lightly, without emphasis. It was the lack of emphasis that unsettled me most. Like someone carefully not looking at a thing. 2 days after the dinner, I came across something while using our shared laptop to look up a flight booking. I wasn't snooping, we'd always used the same laptop for household things, and my own was at the office. Emma's email was open in a browser tab. I wouldn't have thought anything of it except that a notification appeared at the top of the screen while I was on the adjacent tab, a preview line, Adam C. Thursday. I keep thinking about what you said. The preview cut off. I sat with my hands above the keyboard for a very long time. I did not open the email. I want to be honest about the reason. I was afraid of what I'd find, and I was also afraid that if I found it, I would have to do something about it, and doing something about it would mean the end of a decade of life I had built and depended on. Fear makes cowards of us in ways we don't fully understand until later. I closed the laptop and went for a walk. When I came back, Emma was home, and dinner was being assembled, and the evening was entirely normal. We watched something on television and she fell asleep on the couch, and I sat there beside her sleeping form in the blue light of the screen and tried to read the geometry of her face for something: guilt, distance, the trace of another man's presence, and found only the face I'd known for over a decade, soft in sleep, entirely familiar, entirely unreadable. That night, unable to sleep, I opened the home router's admin panel on my phone. Our smart home setup logged connected devices. It was a feature we'd used when we first moved in to track whether various appliances were online. I scrolled through the device list. Our phones. The laptops. The smart TV. The thermostat. And one more, a device listed under a name I didn't recognize. The manufacturer ID resolved to a mobile phone brand. It had connected to our home network 12 days earlier, for approximately 2 hours, during an afternoon when Emma had said she was working from home. The connection timestamp was 2:14 p.m. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. I could have asked her about it directly. I didn't. I opened a new browser tab instead and typed Adam's surname, which I'd seen on a work email she'd had open once, into a social media search. The profile that came up was public. The photo showed a man in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, good-looking in an uncomplicated way, confident in the frame of the image the way some people are confident in any frame. I looked at the photo for longer than I needed to. Then I closed the browser and sat in the dark of our kitchen until the gray hour before dawn began to lighten the window above the sink. I called James on a Monday morning, after consulting a lawyer whose name I'd found through a referral from an old colleague. The lawyer, calm, precise, entirely unsurprised, told me that in the event of a divorce proceeding, documented evidence of infidelity could matter depending on the jurisdiction, but more importantly, he told me to stop using shared devices for anything sensitive. He gave me the name of an investigator he'd worked with before, James. "He's quiet," the lawyer said. "He doesn't overpromise, and he doesn't miss things." I met James for coffee that Wednesday at a place near my office. He was in his 50s, lean in a way that suggested long habit rather than effort, with the careful stillness of a man who had learned to become unobtrusive in rooms. He listened without interrupting while I told him everything: the late nights, the blouse, the phone on the nightstand, the email preview, the unidentified device on the router, the pause over the dinner plates. He wrote nothing down. When I finished, he said, "Give me a week." That week was the longest of my adult life. I continued the performance of my ordinary existence with a precision that surprised me, making coffee, going to work, coming home, asking about Emma's day, watching television, sleeping beside her in the bed we'd shared for more than a decade. I was so careful and so calm that I sometimes wondered, at 2 or 3 in the morning, whether I had constructed the entire suspicion myself, whether what I was experiencing was some internal crisis projected outward, some private collapse wearing the costume of a marital one. Then Emma told me she was going to a girls' night with Lily that Thursday. Something tightened in my chest, very quietly, like a wire being drawn. I said that sounded nice. I asked where they were going. She named a wine bar on the south side that she and Lily occasionally visited, a real place, a plausible place. I said I hoped they had fun. I watched her leave at 7:15 in a jacket I'd not seen before, her hair down, a trace of the perfume that had been appearing more frequently trailing behind her in the hallway. I texted James tonight. She just left. His response came 8 minutes later, already on it. I sat alone in the house for 4 hours. I didn't eat. I watched the notifications from our smart home system, the front door sensor, the motion lights, without touching them, without tracking her, just sat and waited and tried to keep my mind from sprinting too far ahead of what I actually knew. At 11:40, James sent me 3 photographs. The first was taken from across the street from a restaurant I recognized, not the wine bar Emma had named, but a dimly lit Italian place on the east side of the city, somewhere we'd never been together. The image showed 2 people at a window table. The woman was Emma. The man was Adam. Their posture across the table was close, intimate in a way that a long lens doesn't embellish, leaning in, speaking directly to each other's faces. The candlelight caught Emma's earrings. The second photo was taken on the street outside the restaurant, after 11. They were standing beside a parked car, not Emma's, and the photograph was clear enough that there was no ambiguity in the geometry of their bodies, his hand at her waist, her face tilted up toward his. The third photograph was taken at 12:08, from across the street from a hotel 2 blocks away. The hotel's entrance was well lit. The timestamp was accurate. They were walking in together. I set my phone face down on the coffee table. I sat in the chair where I had sat on 1,000 ordinary evenings, and I breathed very carefully, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way you do when you are trying to keep yourself inside your own body. The house made its usual nighttime sounds, the tick of cooling pipes, the refrigerator's cycling hum. Everything was the same. Everything was categorically different. I thought about the router log, the device that had connected to our home network. Adam had been in our house. He had sat in these rooms, perhaps on this furniture, within the walls of the life we had built together. That detail landed differently than the photographs. The photographs were distant, external. The router log was intimate in a way that made my skin feel wrong. I picked up my phone and typed a single text to Emma, "Enjoy your night. Hope he's worth it." Then I went upstairs, packed a bag, and called my closest friend. He answered on the second ring, said nothing unnecessary, and told me to come over. I was out of the house in 12 minutes. Emma's texts began arriving at 12:27. I was sitting in my friend's spare room, on the edge of a bed with a plaid duvet, my bag on the floor, my phone in my hand. The first message read, "Ryan, what does that mean? Where are you?" The second, from minutes later, "Please call me. I can explain. I'm coming home right now." The third, "Please just tell me where you are." I read them in order and set the phone face down on the nightstand. My friend brought me a glass of water. Everyone, apparently, reaches for water in crises, and sat on the chair across from me and didn't fill the silence with anything unnecessary. That's one of the things I've always valued in him, the understanding that sometimes presence is the only thing a person can offer and also the only thing another person needs. I slept poorly. I woke at 5:40 to a screen full of messages, Emma's escalating from explanation to panic to a quiet, devastating, "I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough. I just need you to know I'm sorry." Below that, Lily's name appeared in my notifications, a single text, "Ryan, she called me. I didn't know the whole truth until tonight. I'm sorry I covered for her. That was wrong." Lily's message was the thing I hadn't expected. Not its content. I'd already suspected Emma had used Lily as cover, but the fact that Lily had reached out at all. It told me something about the extent of what Emma had asked her friend to do, and about the weight Lily had apparently been carrying. It also confirmed, without ambiguity, that the girls' night story had been a deliberate construction. I sat with that for a long time. The deception had been layered. Emma hadn't simply lied to me, she had recruited someone I knew, someone I trusted in my peripheral way, to maintain a false account of her whereabouts. That took planning. That took a level of sustained intentionality that was, in its own cold way, more disturbing than the affair itself. Impulse is human. Architecture is a choice. I didn't respond to anyone that day. By Saturday morning, I had been gone 2 nights. Emma had shifted from apology to a different tone, one that carried the particular controlled quality of someone who has regrouped after panic. Ryan, I know you're angry. I know I've hurt you. I need you to know this didn't come from nothing. We've been drifting for years and I know that's not an excuse. I'm not making excuses. I just need to talk to you. Please. I read that message 3 times. The phrase "we've been drifting for years" landed differently each time. On the first read it felt like a deflection, a pivot that shifted some of the responsibility onto the marriage, onto me, onto the accumulated quiet of a decade of routine. On the second read it felt accurate. We had been drifting. That was not in question. On the third read I understood that both things could be true simultaneously. The drift had been real, and the response to it had been a choice. Her choice. On Sunday afternoon, I called James again. I asked him whether he had anything further. He told me he had documented 4 prior meetings between Emma and Adam over the previous 6 weeks, 2 lunches at restaurants near the office that could conceivably be professional, and 2 evenings that could not be characterized as anything other than what they were. He documented the hotel again, a different hotel, 3 weeks prior. 4 prior meetings. 6 weeks. The affair had not been a moment of weakness or a single terrible night. It had been ongoing, planned, sustained across calendar squares while I heated up dinner and left plates covered in foil on the counter. I called the lawyer from my friend's living room with the afternoon light coming through the blinds in pale parallel lines. I told him I was ready to proceed. That evening, for the first time since leaving, I called Emma. She picked up on the first ring. For a few seconds neither of us said anything, just the electronic texture of an open line and 2 people breathing in different rooms. Then she said my name, very quietly, the way she hadn't said it in a long time. "I know everything," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I've known for longer than you think. I want you to understand that I'm not calling to fight. I'm calling because I think you deserve to hear this from me directly before the paperwork makes it official." A long silence. Then, "Ryan, please. We can fix this. I will do anything." Emma. Just her name. She stopped. "He was in our house," I said. "He was connected to our router. He was in the rooms we built together, and you knew that when it happened, and you came home and made dinner and sat across from me and let me believe everything was fine. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the rest of it. The rest of it hurts, but it's understandable in some terrible way. It's the sitting across from me. It's that you could do that." Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. "You're right. You're completely right. I don't know how I became someone who could do that." It was, I recognized later, the most honest thing she had said to me in months. Possibly in years. "I hope you find out," I said. "I genuinely mean that. But I'm not going to be there while you do." I ended the call. I sat in my friend's living room in the fading afternoon light, and didn't feel any of the things I'd imagined I would feel in this moment. No victory. No devastation. Something quieter than both, a kind of arrival. The sense of finally being on the correct side of the truth, whatever the truth cost. Divorce proceedings are, by design, relentlessly procedural. They reduce the wreckage of a shared life to documents, valuations, timelines, and signatures. There is a particular mercy in this. The machinery of legal dissolution doesn't pause to allow sentiment, and sentiment, at a certain stage of grief, is the enemy of forward motion. I returned to the house once, with a friend present, to collect what I needed. Emma was not there. We'd arranged it that way through the lawyers. I moved through rooms I knew by muscle memory, collecting the practical things, my files, my books, the photograph of my parents on their anniversary that had sat on my bedside table since before Emma and I had a bedside table together. I left the kitchen tiles she'd chosen. I left the Sunday evening choreography of a shared life. I left without looking back at the door, not out of dramatic intention but simply because I had already decided what lay behind me and had no need to verify it. What I had not expected was Adam. 2 weeks into the proceedings, James contacted me with a piece of information I hadn't asked for. Adam, it turned out, was not the uncomplicated figure I'd assembled from Emma's descriptions. He was separated from his wife. He'd moved to this city from Chicago partly because the distance from his own failing marriage had suited him. He was not a predator in any simple sense. He was another person navigating a private wreckage, and he and Emma had apparently found in each other something that met a need both of them had. This did not excuse anything. It simply complicated the clean narrative of villain and victim that I'd been organizing in my mind, and James knew that complication mattered because it affected how I understood what I'd lost. What I'd lost was not simply a faithful wife. I'd lost the marriage I believed I'd had, which was not entirely the marriage I'd actually had. That difference was important. The marriage I'd believed in had been composed partly of real things and partly of the stories we'd both been telling, the comfortable maintenance of an appearance of closeness that had, somewhere in the middle years, replaced the actual thing. Emma had responded to that gap by seeking something elsewhere. I had responded to it by refusing to acknowledge the gap existed. We had both been conducting a slow, private failure, and only one of us had done something unforgivable about it. The lawyer was efficient. The divorce was finalized with less confrontation than I'd feared, partly because I had documentation and partly because Emma, to her credit, did not fight what she knew was coming. She kept the house. I took what was fair. The financial untangling was clean enough, given that we had no children, no shared business, no custody to contest. Lily reached out to me once more, about a month after the proceedings began. Her text was brief. For what it's worth, I told her to end it the moment I found out it was serious. She didn't listen. I should have told you. I'm sorry I didn't. I thought about that message for several days before I responded. I told her I didn't blame her for her loyalty to Emma, and that was true. I also told her I thought she'd made the wrong call, and that was equally true. She replied, I know. I'll have to live with that. I found that answer more satisfying than anger would have been. As for Adam, I never confronted him. There was a period, in the first weeks after the photographs, when I had entertained ideas about confrontation, the specific words I'd say, the particular look I'd achieve, the calibrated humiliation I'd administer. But the fantasy dissolved on its own, the way most fantasies do when examined honestly. Adam had done something contemptible, but he was not the author of my marriage. Emma was. She was the one who had made a vow, and she was the one who had quietly, methodically, and with full awareness, chosen to hollow it out. He was a symptom. She was the diagnosis. There is a specific, uncomfortable freedom that comes after the end of a marriage you had been sustaining by willpower alone. I didn't identify it as freedom at first. In the early weeks it felt more like exposure. Like a structure I'd been leaning against had been removed, and I was surprised to discover I could stand without it. I started running again, something I'd let atrophy in the married years. I reorganized my apartment, a small, well-lit place on the east side that I'd found quickly and furnished slowly, one piece at a time, making deliberate choices about what I wanted in the space I now occupied alone. I called people I hadn't called in years. I cooked things I actually wanted to eat rather than things that accommodated someone else's preferences. None of this was dramatic or sudden. Recovery is not an event, it's an accumulation of ordinary mornings that gradually stop being difficult. Somewhere around the 4th month I noticed that I was waking up without the first thought being about the photographs, without the immediate return to the router log and the email preview and the particular curve of two people's bodies in a lamplight photograph taken from across a dark street. The first thought had become something else, the day's work, a book I was reading, the quality of the light through the east-facing window of my new apartment. That, I think, was when I understood I was going to be all right. I never spoke to Emma again after the phone call I made from my friend's living room. She sent one final message, after the divorce was signed: "I hope you find someone who deserves you. I mean that." I read it and didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. I had no cruelty left, which was its own kind of relief, but because I understood that some endings are complete precisely when you stop adding to them. She had said the honest thing on the phone that Sunday afternoon, the admission that she no longer recognized the person she'd become. That was enough. I didn't need more. There is one detail I return to sometimes, not with pain exactly, but with a kind of quiet attention. On the night I drove away from the house with my bag in the back seat, heading to my friend's place, I stopped at a red light 3 blocks from our neighborhood and sat in the dark car and realized that some part of me had known, not suspected, not feared, but known, at some cellular level of recognition, for much longer than I was willing to admit. The midnight phone pulse. The warmth in a name. The pause over a dinner plate. The question I've sat with since is not why she did it. That answer, however painful, is ultimately legible. The question that interests me more, and that I think is worth sitting with honestly, is why I spent so long persuading myself not to know what I already knew. What it costs a person to protect a comfortable story. And what it might have looked like if, somewhere earlier in those months, or somewhere earlier in those years, either of us had been willing to say what was actually true. I don't have a clean answer. I suspect there isn't one. But I carry the question, and I think that's the appropriate thing to carry. What's striking about Ryan's story is not the betrayal itself. Infidelity is, as stories go, one of the oldest, but the particular shape of his blindness. He was, by his own account, an observant man. He noticed the teal blouse. He heard the warmth in a name. He registered the pause over the dinner plate. He catalogued all of these things with impressive precision, stored them in the mental file he was too afraid to open. The red flags were never invisible to him, they were simply intolerable. And that distinction, between not seeing and refusing to see, is where the real psychological story lives. The email preview was the clearest moment of no return, and Ryan didn't cross it. He sat with his hands above the keyboard of a laptop that contained the answer to everything he was already asking, and he chose not to open it. He framed that choice to himself as restraint, perhaps even as fairness, not reading a partner's private correspondence, giving her the benefit of the doubt. But the truth he acknowledged later was simpler and more uncomfortable. He was protecting a version of his life that he couldn't afford to lose yet. That is not a weakness unique to Ryan. It is one of the most universal features of long-term relationships in distress, the way the people inside them will sacrifice clarity in order to preserve continuity. The known pain of an uncertain marriage is easier to tolerate than the unknown pain of its confirmed end. 2 turning points redirected everything. The first was the router log, an accidental discovery, something Ryan wasn't looking for and couldn't rationalize away. Adam's device had been in his house. The abstraction of an affair conducted elsewhere suddenly became spatial, present, physical. That is a different category of knowledge, and it broke something in the defensive architecture Ryan had been building. The second turning point was Lily's text, sent the night Emma was caught. Lily's admission, that she had known, that she had covered, that she was sorry, collapsed the story's remaining false scaffolding. The affair was no longer something Ryan had half imagined, or over-inferred, or projected from his own anxiety. It was confirmed by the person who had been asked to deny it. What is worth examining carefully is Emma's message sent from the hotel bathroom, or wherever she received Ryan's text that night. She did not deny, she did not deflect, she pivoted immediately to apology and explanation. That speed of transition suggests she had already partly rehearsed for discovery, that some part of her had been both conducting the affair and anticipating its end, possibly with relief. The observation Emma made on the phone, that she no longer recognized the person she'd become, was not, I think, an excuse. It was an honest accounting of how people drift into sustained dishonesty, incrementally, each individual step justifiable, until the distance between who they were and who they become is suddenly visible and shocking to themselves. The lessons here are not simple moral ones. Ryan's central mistake was not trust, trust in a marriage is not a mistake. His blind spot was the sustained suppression of evidence in order to avoid a reckoning. The lesson that emerges from that is less about vigilance and more about cost, the cost of protecting a story past the point where it is still true. For Emma, the lesson is about the gap between impulse and architecture, between one terrible night and 6 weeks of planned meetings, of recruited alibis, of another person's phone on a shared router. One is human fragility. The other is a considered choice, and it requires a different kind of accounting. What the story ultimately reveals is how much of a long relationship is composed of agreements that are never spoken aloud. Ryan and Emma had reached a stage of marriage where emotional distance had become the default, where the original closeness had been replaced by a functional proximity, shared space, shared routine, shared mortgage, but not the shared interior life that sustains the thing underneath all of that. Neither of them articulated this. Both of them felt it. That unspoken acknowledgement, that mutual awareness of a gap that neither person was willing to name, is what made everything that followed possible. Betrayal rarely arrives into a vacuum. It arrives into a space that has been quietly prepared for it. Ryan's growth, by the end, is real, the morning thoughts shifting away from photographs, the deliberate construction of a new space, the absence of cruelty in his final silence. But growth purchased at this price comes with permanent alteration. He'll never occupy a marriage again without carrying the memory of what it costs not to say what is true. That is not necessarily a loss. That knowledge, held honestly, is what separates people who learn from their damage from people who simply absorb it and repeat it elsewhere. The detail about Adam, separated, himself in flight from a failing marriage, adds something to the story that easy narratives of infidelity usually don't include: moral complexity. Two broken people finding something real in a wrong place does not excuse what Emma did, but it makes the story truer. And the truest element of all may be Lily's final line: "I'll have to live with that." Betrayal spreads. Everyone near it carries some of its weight, even those who didn't choose it. What stays with me most about this story is not the affair, not the photographs, not even the hotel. It's the image of Ryan at that kitchen counter in the dark, drinking a glass of water he didn't need. Doing it again and again, night after night, standing in the quiet of his own home and feeling that something was wrong without allowing himself to know what. How many nights do we stand at our own metaphorical counters, holding something we don't need, feeling what we're not ready to name? The red flags were never hidden. They were just easier, for a while, to leave in the peripheral vision where they couldn't force a decision. Quiet strength isn't only about how you survive the truth. Sometimes it's about finally letting yourself see it.